Imagine this. A lone bicycle sits abandoned beside a rushing river. A red trailer still attached, loaded with supplies. Nearby, a tarp has been spread out, gear carefully placed as if someone was preparing to camp. But the person who left it all behind? Nowhere to be found. And then, the strangest detail of all. 4 arrows stabbed into the earth in a perfect east-west line. No blood. No footprints. No signs of a struggle. Just silence. This was all that remained of Jacob Gray, a young man who set off on his bicycle into Olympic National Park, one of the most unforgiving landscapes in America, and was never seen alive again. The search that followed would stretch for months, consuming his family, exhausting investigators, and raising questions that have never truly been answered. But before we dive into Jacob's haunting journey, I want to hear from you. If you stumbled across a scene like this, an abandoned bike, untouched supplies, and 4 arrows planted in the ground, what would you think it meant? A message? A clue? Or something far more chilling? Share your theory in the comments, because this story is about to take you into one of the strangest mysteries the wilderness has ever hidden. On the evening of April 5, 2017, Jacob Gray left Port Townsend, Washington, riding into the night on a bicycle. Behind him he towed a small red trailer, packed with an unusual assortment of gear, blankets, a Bible filled with passages he'd highlighted, a camp stove, and even a bow with a quiver of arrows. To some, it looked like the supplies of a traveler preparing for weeks in the wild. To others it felt more symbolic, as if Jacob was heading into the mountains on a personal quest. Nobody knew his exact plan. He hadn't told his family or friends where he was going. He just pedaled into the dark, his trailer rattling behind him. By the following afternoon, April 6th, Jacob's journey had already turned into a mystery. Around 6 miles up Sol Duc Hot Springs Road, in the heart of Olympic National Park, a driver noticed something odd along the roadside. A bicycle stood propped against the trees, its red trailer still attached. At first glance it looked like a cyclist had simply stepped away for a moment. But as the driver slowed, the details became stranger. Spread across the ground was a blue tarp, carefully laid out. On top of it, Jacob's belongings were neatly arranged: food, gear, clothing, as if he had been organizing his camp. Nothing appeared broken, rushed, or scattered. Everything was in order. But Jacob was gone. No sign of a struggle. No footprints leading away. No blood, no torn clothing, no obvious clue about where he had gone. And then came the strangest detail of all. Just a few steps away, 4 arrows were stabbed into the earth, aligned in a near-perfect east-west line. It was too precise to be random. Someone had placed them there deliberately. Why? Signal? A marker? A message only Jacob understood? Later accounts revealed that multiple people had seen him that day. A woman recalled passing a young man on a bicycle, red trailer in tow, straining uphill against the weight. Another driver spotted a lone figure earlier in the pre-dawn hours near Fairholme Hill, pedaling through the mist. These were the last confirmed sightings of Jacob alive. That afternoon, when rangers were called to the scene, their first theory was simple: the river. The Sol Duc River, swollen with snowmelt, rushed just yards from where the bike stood. Its waters are bone-chilling cold, the kind where survival time is measured in minutes. Could Jacob have walked down to filter water, slipped, and been pulled away forever? They swept the riverbanks and even brought in cadaver dogs. At one point, dogs alerted strongly near a log jam downstream, raising hopes that they had found him. But repeated dives and drags turned up nothing. No body. No clothing. Not a trace. Days turned into weeks, and the scene remained as baffling as ever. The bicycle. The trailer. The tarp. The untouched gear. And those 4 arrows, pointing wordlessly across the forest floor. His family was desperate for answers. His father, Randy, launched his own search, combing through Olympic National Park, convinced that Jacob hadn't drowned. Search and rescue teams debated whether he had vanished into the backcountry, moving uphill, a behavior sometimes seen in disoriented or spiritually driven wanderers. And as weeks passed without answers, more theories took root. Did Jacob willingly leave everything behind, vanishing deeper into the mountains on a private journey? Was he hurt, confused, and unable to find his way back? Or, in a darker possibility, had someone else crossed his path on that lonely stretch of road? The truth would not surface for more than a year. Until then, all that remained was an eerie still life on the edge of the rainforest, A bicycle, a trailer, and 4 arrows stabbed into the earth, silent markers of a mystery no one could explain. But Jacob wasn't gone unnoticed. That very morning, before his bike was discovered, several people had crossed paths with him. A man spotted a lone cyclist near Indian Valley. Hours later, a woman driving past Fairholme Hill saw someone struggling uphill with a red trailer. And another witness? She captured the moment when everything would start to unravel, a clue that would haunt investigators for years. What exactly did they see? And why did it lead nowhere, until later? The answers, and the last moments anyone saw Jacob alive, are where the real mystery begins. The morning fog hung heavy over the winding roads of Olympic National Park, blurring the edges of trees and riverbanks. Jacob Gray was out there somewhere, riding into the unknown, his red trailer rattling with every turn of the wheel. To anyone who glimpsed him that day, he seemed like just another adventurous cyclist. But in hindsight, these fleeting sightings would become the final haunting proof of his presence. The first sighting occurred near Indian Valley. A man driving past remembered seeing a lone cyclist navigating the slick, winding roads. The red trailer behind him caught his attention, but the cyclist seemed focused, almost determined, as if following a path only he could see. The man didn't think much of it at the time, just another person exploring the park. Later that same night, around 1 a.m., a woman traveling near Fairholme Hill noticed a shadow moving uphill against the slope. The figure struggled to pull a red trailer, every push of the pedals labored and deliberate. The darkness, the steep incline, and the rattling of the trailer created an unsettling rhythm, one that lingered in her memory. She would later report it, but even then the significance was unclear. Hours later, another woman driving down Sol Duc Hot Springs Road encountered Jacob again. She saw him turning uphill, fighting against the trailer's weight, a solitary figure dwarfed by the towering firs and shadowed ridges. Something about the scene felt wrong, the way he moved, almost invisible under the early morning sky. It was the last confirmed moment anyone saw him alive. When she returned later, retracing her route, she stumbled upon something that would forever haunt the investigation. Jacob's bicycle and trailer abandoned beside the riverbank. The location made no sense. 10 yards from the road, 20 feet from the roaring Sol Duc River. It wasn't a place to hide, not a place to camp, not a place anyone would leave their belongings if they were in danger. Spread neatly on a tarp nearby were Jacob's supplies. Food, clothing, a Bible, even his camping gear, all untouched. And yet he was gone. Even more perplexing were the 4 arrows, stabbed into the soil in a straight east-west line near the tarp. Were they a signal? A compass? A personal marker? No one knew. Rangers and investigators could only speculate. The repeated sightings revealed a chilling pattern. Jacob wasn't following the usual instinct of lost hikers or cyclists, who typically move downhill toward water, roads, or signs of civilization. Every confirmed sighting had him moving uphill, deeper into the mountains, into the dense, treacherous wilderness. Experts would later point out that some people, especially those on personal or spiritual quests, often move uphill rather than downhill, a behavior that would prove hauntingly relevant in Jacob's case. These sightings, seemingly random and isolated, formed a trail of breadcrumbs, a trail that ended in a place no one could reach in time. The final proof of life had been there, yet invisible to the world. And with each mile he traveled, the mystery deepened. Why abandon his bike? Why leave his gear so neatly arranged? What did the arrows mean? One thing was clear. Jacob Gray was alive that morning, fighting uphill against the weight of his trailer, alone in the wilderness. But in the hours that followed, the last pieces of the puzzle would slip further from reach. And as investigators, rangers, and his family would soon discover, the abandoned bike would mark the beginning of a search that stretched into months, consumed lives, and left questions that may never be fully answered. The next clues, the tarp, the arrows, and the strange arrangement of his gear, would be the key to understanding what happened, if anyone could piece it together. For 3 days, Jacob Gray's bicycle and trailer sat on the roadside, exposed to the cold, misty forest and the roaring Sol Duc River. And yet no official search had begun. In the isolated corridors of Olympic National Park, the bureaucracy had slowed to a crawl. Rangers assumed he might be on a short hike. Volunteers were restricted. The Coast Guard was turned away. Every hour that passed in the wilderness was a ticking clock, and Jacob's family was left entirely in the dark. It wasn't until April 7th that the Gray family received the devastating news. Ranger Brian Ray had found Jacob's list of phone numbers in his gear and called his sister, Molly Gray. The words barely registered at first. Disbelief, panic, and horror collided in her mind. Her brother was missing, alone in one of the most unforgiving wildernesses in the country. Jacob's father, Randy Gray, didn't pause to process. He threw his wetsuit into his truck and drove straight through the night from Santa Cruz to Washington, eyes bloodshot, adrenaline pumping, stopping only when pulled over at 100 miles per hour in Oregon. Explaining the urgency, he was let go with only a warning. He didn't care about tickets or laws, only one thing mattered: finding his son. When Randy and Molly arrived, they were stunned. The park was understaffed. 2/3 of law enforcement personnel had been reassigned elsewhere. The missing person case, buried under plane crashes and other emergencies, had received little to no attention. There was no organized search, no volunteers, no helicopters, just the untouched bicycle on the roadside and 4 mysterious arrows in the dirt. For the Gray family, every second wasted was unbearable. Time in the wilderness isn't just precious, it's life or death. The icy Sol Duc River, swollen with snowmelt, ran fast and merciless. Randy dove into its waters himself, searching behind waterfalls and log jams where Jacob could be trapped. The river stole his breath, but he refused to stop. Randy's physical suffering was immense. His hands were shredded by Devil's Club, a bramble that tore through gloves like paper. His feet developed trench foot from constantly wet socks. His body was battered from boulders, roots, and the unforgiving terrain. He didn't eat properly, survived on river water and brief moments of rest. Yet through every hardship he never complained. Every bruised knuckle, every scraped knee, every frozen fingertip was a small price for the chance of finding Jacob alive. Molly, too, endured the crushing helplessness of waiting. She could do nothing but follow the news from the park, hoping for updates. Each report of a possible sighting brought a flicker of hope, quickly replaced by disappointment when the trail went cold. Every evening, the family huddled together in a camper, haunted by the thought that Jacob might be out there, scared, lost, or worse. They were alone against a system that couldn't, or wouldn't, act fast enough. Volunteers were denied access. Search and rescue teams were slow to arrive. The Coast Guard, mere minutes away, was turned down. Each day of waiting felt like an eternity, and the wilderness seemed to mock them with its silence. Randy made a choice that would define the rest of his life. If the park wouldn't act, he would. He sold his contracting business. He sold the family home. He bought a diesel pickup and a camper, living on the road for months, chasing every clue, examining every piece of terrain Jacob could have traversed. Sleep, food, and comfort became irrelevant. All that mattered was finding his son. Every day alone in the wilderness left the family with a growing sense of dread. Why had Jacob left his bicycle in plain view? Why were his belongings so carefully arranged? And what was the meaning of those 4 arrows planted in the dirt? The questions gnawed at them, an invisible weight heavier than any boulder or river current. As Randy plunged further into the search, combing rivers, climbing ridges, and following possible trails, he began to sense a chilling possibility. Jacob had intentionally left the safety of the road and climbed into the mountains. If that was true, every moment wasted, every rule followed protocol, had allowed the wilderness to pull him further from civilization, and further from anyone who might save him. The family's isolation, both emotional and practical, was total. The park and its procedures couldn't move fast enough, and yet there was no time to wait. The wilderness had swallowed their son, leaving behind only a bicycle, a tarp, and 4 arrows pointing to a secret no one yet understood. And it was those arrows, standing silently in the earth, that would soon become the first real clue in unraveling the mystery of Jacob Gray's disappearance. For his family, every unanswered question was a knife in the heart. Each day that passed without a search, without help, made the hopelessness grow heavier. But Randy Gray refused to wait. He couldn't wait. The park couldn't save his son, only he could. As he stared at the abandoned gear and the arrows pointing silently across the forest floor, a single thought burned in his mind: I have to find him. No matter what it takes. What Randy would do next, the sacrifices he would make, the miles he would cover, and the risks he would face, would push him to the very edge. And in the shadow of the Olympic Mountains, a father's relentless search was about to begin. Randy Gray didn't wait. The moment he saw Jacob's bicycle abandoned beside the Sol Duc River, a cold clarity hit him. The park couldn't and wouldn't act fast enough. Time was slipping through their fingers like water over rocks. Every second lost could be the difference between life and death. And Randy knew one truth. If Jacob was still alive, only he could find him. The wilderness that swallowed Jacob was brutal. The Sol Duc River roared with snowmelt fed by the icy Olympic peaks. Its fast-moving currents carved through boulders, log jams, and hidden pools. One wrong step, one slip, and Randy could have joined the search as another victim. But fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. Each waterfall, each log jam, each moss-covered boulder became a potential hiding place for his son, and he would check every single one. Randy plunged into the icy river, wearing only a cotton shirt under a PVC rain suit. Water froze against his skin. His feet developed trench foot from hours spent wading, searching, and climbing. Devil's Club, a bramble that tore through gloves and flesh alike, shredded his hands. Bruises and cuts mapped the story of his relentless pursuit across the rugged terrain. Yet he never paused. Every bruise, every scrape, every aching muscle was worth it if it meant one more chance to find Jacob alive. He adapted to the wilderness, learning quickly that normal search methods weren't enough. He tied himself to ropes to lower into deep pools, crawled under log jams, and even boogie-boarded down sections of rapids, scanning every nook and cranny where his son might have fallen or hidden. He hiked miles that would leave most people collapsing, retracing Jacob's possible paths uphill and down, searching places that rangers hadn't even thought to check. Every day brought new emotional trials. Footprints in the mud, broken branches, and fleeting glimpses of movement kept hope alive, but also gnawed at his mind. Was it Jacob? Or someone else? The sightings from earlier in the month suggested Jacob had been moving uphill, into treacherous areas where few would dare to tread. Randy considered every possibility. Had Jacob been lost, disoriented, or following some inner quest? Each scenario was equally terrifying. The bureaucracy of the park added another layer of frustration. Volunteers were turned away. The Coast Guard, stationed just minutes away, was denied access. Only park-approved teams could operate, and even then they arrived slowly, often inadequately equipped. Every wasted hour was another mile Jacob could move further into the wilderness. Randy knew waiting was not an option. Driven by desperation, Randy sold his Santa Cruz home and closed his contracting business. He converted a diesel pickup into a mobile command center, sleeping, eating, and living out of it for months. He chased every rumor, investigated every sighting, and retraced every trail. He returned repeatedly to the river, the abandoned gear, and the 4 arrows planted in the dirt, searching for clues that might have been missed. His body deteriorated under the strain. Sleep came only in fleeting moments, meals were rare, and his body ached constantly from relentless exertion. But with each step, each climb, each freezing river crossing, he imagined Jacob still alive somewhere, waiting for someone to find him. His exhaustion was dwarfed by his determination. Emotionally, Randy carried a burden heavier than any boulder in the forest. The uncertainty, the unanswered questions, the bureaucratic obstacles, all of it pressed down on him. Every day without answers, every lead that went cold, was another mental battle. Yet he refused to give in. His love for Jacob and the belief that he might still be alive pushed him onward. Randy's search wasn't just about following a trail. It was about chasing hope in the face of despair. Every river bend, every cliff, every snow-covered ridge became a potential location where Jacob could be found. The wilderness was vast, relentless, and unforgiving, but so was a father's determination. And in the silence of the Olympic Mountains, as Randy pushed deeper into uncharted territory, he realized the truth. The answers weren't just in the river or the trails. They were out there in the wilderness waiting for him to uncover them. The abandoned bicycle, the carefully arranged gear, and the 4 arrows planted in the dirt were clues. Clues that would eventually reveal where Jacob had gone and why. But the forest held its secrets tightly. For every clue Randy uncovered, another question arose. And the next discovery, the tarp, the arrows, and the strange arrangement of Jacob's gear, would push the search into even darker, more mysterious territory. Randy Gray had become a force of nature, relentless, tireless, and unwilling to accept defeat. Yet as he approached the Sol Duc River one cold morning, The sight that greeted him would leave him stunned, puzzled, and questioning everything he thought he knew about Jacob's disappearance. What he found there would change the course of the search forever. The morning mist clung to the forest like a shroud when Randy Gray arrived at the Sol Duc River, retracing the path where the last sightings had placed Jacob. And there it was, the bicycle. Red, worn, and untouched. The trailer lay slightly tilted as if Jacob had simply stepped away for a moment and never returned. At first glance it seemed ordinary. But as Randy stepped closer, a cold realization washed over him. Everything was unnaturally arranged. A poly tarp was spread on the ground, camping gear meticulously organized around it. Food, clothing, and personal items were untouched, yet no one was in sight. The scene was too deliberate to be random, too precise to be abandoned in haste. Then his eyes fell on the 4 arrows, planted in the dirt in a perfect east-west line. 4 sticks of wood, sharpened or selected with care, pointing in a direction only Jacob might have understood. What did they mean? A signal for someone else? A personal marker? Or a cryptic compass, guiding him somewhere far beyond where any rescuer would look? The location itself was baffling. 10 yards from the road, 20 feet from the icy current of the river, it was not a place to camp, hide, or leave gear. The area offered no shelter, no cover, no reason for anyone to stop. Yet the tarp and the arrows suggested intention. Deliberation. A message left behind. Randy scanned the scene carefully. The bicycle was fully functional. Tires still inflated. Gear intact. No signs of struggle. It was as if Jacob had walked away willingly, leaving everything behind as a statement, a signpost, or perhaps a clue to a path only he understood. The arrows haunted Randy. Planted perfectly in a straight line, they seemed almost ceremonial. Rangers and searchers had never seen anything like it. Could they indicate a direction? A warning? Or were they Jacob's way of marking the beginning of a journey deeper into the mountains? Every item around the tarp was positioned with care. A Bible with passages circled. A few personal items missing, suggesting they had been taken intentionally or kept close. Even the trailer was oriented slightly off-center, aligned with the arrow line. The wilderness around it whispered secrets, but none spoke clearly. Randy realized the magnitude of what he had discovered. This wasn't just an abandoned bicycle. It wasn't just gear left behind. It was a message, a marker, and a mystery rolled into one. Someone had orchestrated this scene intentionally. And if it wasn't a message for rescuers, then it was something else entirely, something only Jacob understood. Questions surged. Why 4 arrows? Why a straight line? Why leave the gear so meticulously arranged yet walk away into the unknown? And where had Jacob gone after leaving this scene behind? The discovery sent chills through Randy. It was beautiful in its precision, eerie in its calmness, and terrifying in its implications. The arrows were pointing toward something somewhere. But what? And who would follow them? As he stared at the tableau, Randy felt a surge of determination. The wilderness had swallowed his son once, but now he had a clue, a trail of intentionality. The search would change direction. Every step he had taken before had been reactive, following possibilities. Now he had a tangible, deliberate sign left by Jacob himself. A breadcrumb leading into the heart of the mountains toward answers that no one else could see. And yet, with the arrows pointing silently into the dense forest, Randy couldn't shake the feeling that the most difficult part of the search was just beginning. Whatever path Jacob had chosen, whether guided by fear, hope, or a deeper purpose, would test him, push him to the edge, and ultimately reveal truths that no one could anticipate. The 4 arrows stood silently waiting. And Randy knew this was where the wilderness had drawn the first line of the next chapter. The wilderness held its breath. And so did Randy, knowing that the next step could finally reveal answers, or lead him to a truth he might not be ready to face. The arrows pointed deeper into the Olympic wilderness, and Randy Gray followed without hesitation. Every step took him further from roads, from safety, and into terrain that seemed almost designed to test human limits. Snowmelt trickled from steep ridges, turning trails into slippery torrents. Dense forests closed in on him, and devil's club and thickets tore at his hands and face. Every step was a risk, every misstep potentially fatal. Hours turned into days. Randy mapped every possibility, retracing Jacob's likely path based on the arrows and the careful placement of his gear. High ridges loomed above him, jagged and unyielding. Narrow ledges skirted deep drops. Frozen streams threatened to sweep him away. Yet he pushed forward, driven by the unrelenting need to find his son. Then came the first breakthrough. Small, subtle clues appeared. Footprints leading off the trail, a crushed patch of moss where someone had slipped, a hint of a campsite hidden among boulders. Randy's heart raced. He examined each clue meticulously, photographing, marking, and documenting them. Every detail mattered. Each led him closer to understanding where Jacob had gone and why. But the wilderness refused to give up its secrets easily. 2 cadaver dogs hit on a log jam downstream, alerting handlers to the possibility of human remains. Divers returned again and again, scouring every nook, every submerged cavity, only to come up empty. The scent, volatile and misleading, could have been washed downstream by snowmelt, carried by the wind or left by wildlife. Frustration mounted, but Randy pressed on. He climbed ridges, checked hidden caves, and searched behind waterfalls, literally lowering himself into pools where no one else dared to tread. His body ached, frost-bitten fingertips and bruised knuckles a constant reminder of the physical cost. He subsisted on river water and occasional trail snacks, his mind focusing only on Jacob. Each day without a discovery felt like a day slipping further from hope. Then in August, after months of relentless searching, a team of biologists studying marmots stumbled upon something extraordinary. High above Hull Lake, 5,300 feet above sea level, and at least 15 miles from where Jacob's bicycle had been left, they found human remains. The location was almost impossible to reach, far from any trail, exposed to the elements and surrounded by sheer cliffs and dense forest. Randy received the news with a mixture of dread and anticipation. He climbed toward the site as fast as he could, ignoring Ranger Ray's warnings to let the professionals handle it. "What would you do?" he asked. "When does a dad stop being a dad?" The scene above Hull Lake was haunting. Jacob's body lay far from civilization, in a place where even a helicopter would struggle to land. Hypothermia was suspected, the cruel hand of nature claiming a young man who had everything he needed to survive. Insulated clothing, a warm jacket, climbing gear, food, a Bible, and even a lighter. Yet somehow it hadn't been enough. Every clue that had puzzled searchers, the abandoned bicycle, the tarp, the 4 arrows, the carefully arranged gear, suddenly made a strange kind of sense. Jacob hadn't been trying to hide. He hadn't been trying to survive for long. He had been following something internal, a purpose, a calling, guiding him higher into the mountains, away from help, away from the river, away from civilization. Randy couldn't look away. His body screamed from exhaustion, his mind struggled to comprehend what had transpired, but he had found his son. The relief was immediate, but it came hand in hand with grief. Months of tireless searching had led to this point, and now the answers were partially revealed, yet questions remained. Why had Jacob climbed instead of following the river to safety? Why had he left his bicycle, trailer, and carefully arranged gear in plain sight? What did the 4 arrows truly signify? The answers would forever remain partially hidden, locked within the mind of a young man who had vanished into the wilderness in search of something greater. Randy stayed, taking in the scene, helping the recovery team, assisting with procedures, and absorbing the reality of what the wilderness had claimed. The mountains had been both a guide and a grave, and the young man who had embarked on a journey of self-discovery had reached his destination, tragic, enigmatic, and final. Yet even here in the aftermath the story didn't end. Every clue, every arrow, every step Jacob had taken remained a puzzle. And for Randy Gray, the relentless search had not been in vain. He had found his son. He had discovered the truth of where Jacob had gone. But he also realized one profound thing. Some mysteries are not about what happens to someone. They are about what was happening inside them all along. Cliffhanger to flow into Part 7, the final revelation and meaning of the journey. As Randy looked over the ridge above Hull Lake, he traced the path Jacob must have taken from the bicycle to the arrows to the hidden peaks. And in that moment he understood something terrifying and beautiful. Jacob's journey hadn't been random, and the answers were far deeper than the wilderness itself. They were in his mind, his heart, and the search for meaning he had undertaken alone. The final piece of the mystery awaited. The true reason behind Jacob Gray's vanishing, the message of the arrows, and the path he had chosen for himself. High above Hull Lake, the wind whistled through jagged peaks, carrying with it the silence of the wilderness. Randy Gray stood over his son's final resting place, the months of relentless searching etched into every line of his body and face. The journey had been brutal, physically punishing, and emotionally exhausting, yet the truth was finally in sight. Jacob Gray had not vanished by accident. He had chosen a path that defied logic, guided not by maps or rivers, but by an inner compass only he could follow. The abandoned bicycle, the carefully arranged gear, and the 4 arrows planted in the dirt were not signals for rescuers. They were markers for himself, signs pointing toward the destination he had chosen. A place of solitude, reflection, and answers to questions that had haunted him for months. Experts like Dr. Robert Kester, author of Lost Person Behavior, had long observed a pattern. Children and sometimes adults will move upward, into higher, more exposed terrain, when seeking clarity, vision, or purpose. And Jacob had climbed deliberately into the mountains, following what he believed was a path to understanding. The Bible found with his gear gave further insight. Isaiah 34 verse 14 was circled. Verses about desert creatures, night monsters, and mysterious creatures of the wilderness. For Jacob, the mountains were not just physical obstacles, they were a spiritual landscape. He had been searching for meaning, a message, a revelation that could only be found in isolation and the raw silence of nature. Randy realized the heart of the tragedy. Jacob had everything he needed to survive physically: insulated clothing, food, lighter, gear, but he was seeking something far more intangible. He was searching for purpose, for answers to questions no one else could answer. The harsh reality of hypothermia, combined with the exposure of a ridge miles from civilization, had claimed his life. But in a sense he had reached his destination. He had found what he was looking for: peace, understanding, or an end to inner turmoil, in the only way he could. The 4 arrows planted near the Sol Duk River now took on a haunting new meaning. They were Jacob's personal compass, pointing not to safety, but to the mountains, to the journey he chose for himself. Each arrow marked intention, direction, and resolve. And ultimately the path that led him far from the river, the road, and the world he knew. For Randy and his family, grief was overwhelming. Months of tireless searching had ended with a body, not a reunion. Yet there was clarity, a bittersweet understanding of Jacob's inner journey. He hadn't wandered aimlessly. He hadn't been the victim of a stranger or foul play. He had been lost in life, searching for meaning, and the wilderness gave him what he sought, at a devastating cost. Jacob Gray's story is more than a missing person case. It's a story of a young man confronting the chaos of life, seeking purpose, and ultimately making choices that no one else could fully understand. The wilderness, silent and indifferent, became the stage for his quest, for direction, for clarity, for answers to questions only he could ask. And for Randy Gray, the journey continues. The search may have ended, but the understanding, the memory, and the love for his son endure. Jacob's story reminds us that sometimes, the greatest mysteries aren't about what happened to someone, but about what was happening inside them all along. In the end, Jacob Gray found his truth on a remote ridge, surrounded by the vast silence of the Olympic Mountains. And though it came at the ultimate price, the wilderness gave him exactly what he was searching for: a profound, if tragic, answer to life's most elusive questions. Jacob Gray's story is a haunting reminder that sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't about what happened to someone, but what was happening inside them all along. His journey into the wilderness, guided by hope, curiosity, and a search for meaning, ended tragically, yet it leaves us with a profound lesson about life, purpose, and the choices we make. If this story left you questioning, reflecting, or feeling the weight of Jacob's journey, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories that dive deep into the mysteries of the human experience. And I want to hear from you. What do you think drove Jacob to leave his bike and venture into the mountains? Was it a spiritual quest, a search for meaning, or something else entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your theory could spark the next discussion we explore. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an untold story. And if you found yourself captivated by Jacob's journey, share this video with someone who loves mysteries, missing person cases, or real-life stories that stay with you long after the video ends. Remember, every story has more beneath the surface. And here on Untold Stories by Celine, we're uncovering the hidden truths one story at a time.